you'll say, "Get me the REBNY form," or "What is the opinion of REBNY?" or what is REBNY advising to do on this issue? You're an industry leader in a way, guiding this complex world of New York called New York City real estate.
This is the Co-op and Condo Insider, the podcast dedicated to New York's cooperative and condominium communities. This is your trusted source for the latest insights, strategies, and stories shaping the world of shared housing. You will hear from the people who are leaders in this community, information and insights you will not hear anywhere else. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, you're in the right place. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the host or any affiliated individuals or organizations.
Hello, and welcome to the Co-op and Condo Insider, where we explore real-world issues facing co-op and condominium communities across New York City, with insight, expertise, and a healthy dose of straight talk. I'm your host, Jeffrey Maisel. I'm a co-op attorney and legal advisor to the President's Co-op and Condo Council. Now I'm thrilled to be joined by my co-host, Richard Solomon, a seasoned voice in public radio for over 20 years. Richard has taken his listeners around the world to meet experts, newsmakers, and they're making a real difference in our everyday lives. Richard, it's great to have you on the mic today.
Love being here.
Okay, and we're really excited to have our guest today, Zachary Steinberg. Zachary Steinberg is the Executive Vice President of External Relations and Advocacy. That is a mouthful, Zachary. You'll have to read that a few times to memorize it, but congratulations on your new role at the Real Estate Board in New York. He leads advocacy strategies to advance the Real Estate Board's public policy priorities and oversees external relationships and outreach and policymakers. His work has helped advance sensible city, state, and federal policies that support REBNY's objectives. Prior to REBNY, Zach was Deputy Policy Director in the Office of the New York City Controller and worked for the for former U.S. Senator Tom Harkin. Zach, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
And I can't say from personal experience that Zach is a key player on many, many issues regarding co-op and condo issues. And, we kind of work behind the scenes sometimes not behind the scenes, but all your help over the years is appreciated by both myself and the co-op community in general.
You've been a pleasure to work with, Jeff.
Okay, so we'll live from the beginning. How's that? So, Zach, last podcast Richard and I did was with Council Member Francisco Moya. And Francisco Moya lives in the same house he grew up in. And doing a little research on you do not. Okay, so you were born in Iowa. Okay, we had Manitoba, so not the most exotic place that we're interviewing, but getting there. Tell us a bit about your early life there, and tell us about the path from Iowa to New York City.
Yeah, well, I wasn't actually born in Iowa. I was born in Boston because I was born to some college professor parents who were, I think like many college professor families were trying to figure out where we're going to land permanently, which means where your family's going to get tenure. So eventually my dad wound up getting tenure at the University of Iowa. So off we moved to Iowa City, Iowa. And, it was a really wonderful place to grow up. College towns are great, but they're a little bit different than New York City, obviously. The nice thing about Iowa, from my perspective, or one of them at least, is that it's really hard not to get into politics and government when you live there. Not just because of the university and the community that it generates and supports, but Iowa City especially was a huge draw for politicians from across the political spectrum when I was growing up, back when the Iowa caucuses were still, the first in the nation and one of the most important political events in the country every 4 years. And so, candidates would come through. And the great thing about the Iowa caucuses, you could go see them at a union hall, you could go see them at a VFW, you could see them at the supermarket. And you could talk to them and you could meet them and you could understand and exchange ideas and go to rallies and really understand, how do politics work? How do politicians think? How does government happen? And so I guess that sort of got the bug for getting into the line of work that I am in today. So when I was 17, not long before I went off to college, I participated in the Iowa caucuses. And I think that's sort of how I got interested in working in and around government. After I went off to college, I decided to move to D.C., where I started working for, as you said, Senator Harkin, who was a 40-year Iowa congressman and senator. I spent 7 years in his office doing all kinds of things. I started, my first job was responding to constituent mail, and eventually worked my way up to having my own sort of policy portfolio and advising him on issues ranging from labor policy and retirement policy to financial services, trade, and a number of other things. Tom was an amazing person to work for. He, as I said, he'd been in office for 40 years when he retired. And he was the kind of person who I think was really in government for the right reasons, about making life better for people every day. He was a progressive Democrat who knew how to get things done and how to work collaboratively with people on all sides of the aisle and all sides of the political spectrum to make a difference. For example, he's the author of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which, is one of the most significant pieces of civil rights legislation in recent memory, signed into law by President George H.W. Bush. It's hard to imagine that kind of bipartisanship and collaboration in Washington today, but eventually he retired. And shortly thereafter, my wife got a job up in New York City. So we moved up here.
So one thing, I guess, differences between New York and Iowa, we don't have college football, and our presidential politics in New York are boring. They don't even come here because there's no reason to come here. Explain to me, and this is really a personal question. I don't understand exactly what is a caucus. What's everybody talking about, and what are they doing?
I'm not sure I understand it either, Jeff. Basically what you do is you get in a big room and you go stand in a corner. And, the corner is basically which candidate you want to support. And there is a first round where everyone goes and sort of splits up. And then, at least the way it worked when I was doing it, there's a time for then each person or each group of supporters to make a speech, try to talk to your neighbors, convince them to move corners. And that's important because if candidates didn't get over a certain percentage of the room, they were determined to be what's called non-viable. And then those people and everyone else gets to go split up, and there's a second round. And that's where they decide, okay, how many people are going to be for this candidate or that candidate. And each polling site, caucus site, gets a certain number of delegates, and the delegates then get apportioned based on how many people decide to stand with that particular candidate. And those are delegates to the county conventions and ultimately the state conventions where that person is chosen. So instead of going into the ballot booth, you fill in a little circle and you are off on your way. You have to make a commitment of time. You got to talk to your neighbors. You have to sort of identify where you are, and it's a different process.
Amazing. So what years did you work for the senator?
I was there from 2008 to 2015.
And did you get to work with him closely?
Yeah. The thing about Senate offices is they're big, but they're not that big. And in a state like Iowa, everyone's problems become your problems in some ways. And so there's an expectation that from, staff assistants and legislative correspondents who are sort of entry level, first jobs out of college kind of things, you're interacting with constituents, and you're reporting back to the senator on what people are saying. What are they writing him about? What are the issues they're experiencing? What does he need to know when he's going to walk into a room of people visiting him, from whatever part of the state they're in? And so you get a real opportunity to both help him or her, whoever the elected official may be, but also then, respond back to the folks who send you to Washington in the first place. So it's a wonderful experience.
But Senator Harkin, during that time period, he was a senior member of the Democratic caucus and was extremely influential. So that must have been fascinating for you as a young intern.
It was an incredible place to learn. The Senate and Congress in general, it was filled with incredibly smart, passionate, thoughtful people from all sides of the political spectrum. And for someone just out of college, you couldn't get a better crash course in how to think about the world, how to understand policy, how to meet people, how to make relationships, how to live in the world.
So now you leave DC and you come to New York City. Did you go to REBNY? And by the way, for you folks listening, REBNY is the Real Estate Board of New York. So we're going to use the initials REBNY. Did you go to work for them right away, or did you work somewhere else before?
Yeah, so after moving to New York City, I spent several months trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. One of the things I learned, and I was a little surprised by it, was that there's not actually a very strong pipeline between Washington, D.C. and the New York City government and policymaking world. There's a very big, strong pipeline of people who move between Albany and New York City and state government, but not so much at the federal level. So it took me a while to build connections, to meet people, to sort of understand the structure of New York City and New York State government. And eventually that took me to the New York City Controller's office, who was then Scott Stringer. And it was a really great place to land as my first job in New York City government world. Scott and the team he had around him had been in office for, I mean, since Scott was a teenager, they'd been working in government. And so for someone like me coming in new to New York City, it was an incredible place to sort of figure out who's who here. What agency does what kind of things? How should I think about how city government is structured? How should I learn about who these various people are? And so it was a really wonderful experience. And obviously, I think, the common thread in my career to that point, was working for elected officials who were driven by policy. Both Tom, Scott are incredibly thoughtful, policy-oriented folks who are obviously, they're politicians, but they have incredible policy accomplishments and have really made a difference in people's lives. And so I think, I spent a couple of years there, and then it was sort of time for me to figure out what was next.
And next was REBNY. So explain to us, what does the Real Estate Board of New York do? Who do they represent? And I know that's a long answer for a short question, but do your best.
Well, I'm still figuring it out myself, I think. We are a about 14,000 member trade association that represents the New York City real estate industry. And I really think I use industry, maybe ecosystem might be a better word. We're a 130-year-old organization. And we've come to be known, I think, publicly as the advocacy arm of big real estate. But we're also the convener for the industry, and in some ways function a bit like a chamber of commerce might. So we host committee meetings. We do events. They're networking events. They're education events. They might be policy conversation events. We do award ceremonies, whether that's for residential brokerage, commercial brokerage, property management. And we do things like develop standards. You may have signed a lease at one point in your life that was the REBNY lease. And so we sort of do a lot of different things in the New York City real estate world, in addition to sort of our advocacy and our work in that space that's probably most well known.
Is REBNY unique to New York? Because I used to live in DC also, and there was really no strong real estate industry at the time that I lived there. It was very dispersed.
Yeah, we are pretty unique. I think there are obviously not federal trade associations, that do a lot of work in sort of DC and the federal government level, from groups like the Real Estate Roundtable, the National Association of Real Estate Investment Trusts, et cetera, et cetera. There's a sort of an alphabet soup of them, but there are relatively few who operate at the local level. There are some groups in California. There are some various chapters of an organization called the Building Owners and Managers Association, BOMA, that does a lot of sort of professional certification kinds of things. But there's not an organization like us, and I think why I called it an ecosystem, that incorporates the entirety of the real estate ecosystem under one roof in a metro area like New York City or any other major city in the country.
And legislative advocacy is just a small part of what's happening at REBNY. I know invariably in conversations, you'll say, get me the REBNY form, or what is the opinion of REBNY, or what is REBNY advising to do on this issue? You're an industry leader in a way, guiding this complex world of called New York City real estate.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I think we try to be. We try to find ways where we can add value. There are issues. I think back to the pandemic, which I tried not to think about, but it was also an opportunity where we really did have to step up and play a bit of a leadership role, because you had guidance coming out from the federal government, from the state government, from the city government, and it was dense, it was technical. Sometimes it wasn't, it didn't always agree. And our members looked to us to help them understand, okay, what do I do? What are the right standards for air handling in a building? What are the right ways to bring people back into a building? What are the requirement for how many people can be in an elevator at any given time? When can I reopen my gym and health club? And we were intimately involved in trying to craft responsible policies in that space. And so, we try to do that where we can make a difference. We try to do it in a way where we're not just sort of, adding burden, But hopefully it's something we can do and execute and make things better for people.
And also I've seen REBNY brings government and the private sector together, whether it be the DOB, finance, things like that.
Yeah, that's
Why don't you
absolutely.
talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's absolutely a core part of what we do, and I think it sort of bleeds into what I call the advocacy arm of big real estate. Our members are very well versed at their day-to-day business, which is, it might be running an office building, it might be building a new housing tower, it might be managing a co-op or a condo, and the government is well versed at what it does, which might be permitting a new building, it might be thinking about a rezoning, it might be understanding a particular administering a tax benefit program. But, those things don't always talk to each other. And so I think where we really come in is trying to sit at the intersection of those different groups and say to our members, okay, here's the problem government's trying to solve. How do we help them solve it? And say to government, well, here's the problem our members are trying to overcome. How do we help them solve it? And how do we try to, collaborate between those two parties? A lot of that is relationship building, making sure we know folks in government and in the industry who we can talk to try to find common ground. And a lot of that is just bringing folks together and putting them in a room and letting them talk things out. We do a lot of work, and Jeff, we've worked with you and the President's Council and a lot of your members on issues like this all the time. I think about the co-op condo tax abatement, where, the Department of Finance has, for a long time, had challenges administering that program. Not because I think they've wanted to make it difficult, but, they have an outdated technology system. It's a complicated process. And we've really brought the industry and the Department of Finance together in the last couple of years, and I think in a way that has really improved things. Is it perfect? No, but there's more dialogue. Problems are getting solved. Things are getting better, and I think that's a role we play that hopefully we're able to help with everyone.
Absolutely. I have the privilege of being a legal advisor to the Residential Management Committee, which is mostly called condo real estate managers. And I attend the monthly meetings, and every month is a master class in new regulations, new laws, guests from government, guests from private sector, and it's a tremendous service. And I know this community relies on on that committee very deeply.
One of the things that has changed even in my time at REBNY, and I've been there for 7 years now almost, the volume of issues we work on has only gone up in that time, and the complexity of the issues we work on, not just in terms of what the political environment is like, but just the volume of issues. The city council is considering more and more things. The state legislature considers more and more things all the time. There's new regulation from the Department of Buildings. There's a new operating system for the Department of Finance, and all of that just makes I think the importance of being able to convene government and industry and to be able to communicate across the industry to sort of say, here's what to expect, here's what they're trying to do, are there ways we can help them do it better, here's the next iteration of this regulation, here's what we should be commenting on when we have the opportunity, is a really helpful thing for us as well, and hopefully helps the industry be successful.
So it's almost like a facilitator organization for the management companies and the building owners.
I hope so.
Tell us what you're doing for REBNY, what your day-to-day job entails, and if you want to repeat your new title, feel free.
Thank you. Yeah, no, so I run external relations and advocacy at REBNY. What does that mean? I think it means ensuring that we execute on our advocacy priorities, whether that means we're trying to make something happen, or whether that means we're trying to prevent something from happening, excuse me. And we're trying to do that to advance the interests of our members. So what does that mean? It means retaining, growing relationships with policymakers and elected officials. It means keeping in close touch with our members to understand the issues that are forefront of their minds and their priorities. It requires designing and executing advocacy strategies. That might be building relationships with other stakeholders outside of government. It might be working directly with elected officials to help them advance their priorities when we support them, or try to give them feedback about proposals that we think need to be improved. It means managing a team of professionals. There's a whole group of us at REBNY, both who do public policy analysis, who do data analysis, who are plugged into the market, and whose job it is to have these relationships and making sure that we're executing on them effectively. And so all of that is what, we try to accomplish in our external relations work. And hopefully we get it right more than we get it wrong.
I always say it's like a sinking ship. They just keep coming at you and you can't keep up. Um, how do you guys identify the issues that you want to work on and then facilitate that into action?
And question, how do you manage conflict between the policy choices of your members on the same issue?
That's a great question. I was going to get into that because Zach and I, just in full disclosure, we've disagreed on issues and we're allowed to disagree but I'll let Zach answer that.
What conflict? No, yeah. Um, well, I think the thing about having such a diverse membership base is that, yes, I think there are times where there are issues where segments of that membership may have differences of opinion. Sometimes it may be someone wants us to prioritize something over another. Sometimes it may be there are just people at odds, or there's winners and losers, and who wins a real estate RFP, there's a winner or a loser. But I think what we try to do is stay at the level of, is the overall policy trajectory good for the city in the long run, or is it going to hurt the city in the long run? And generally speaking, if it's good for the city of New York, it's going to be good for our members in the long run. So I think we try to take that sort of longer term perspective. There are some issues where that's not possible. And where that's the case, it requires, having built trust and relationships with our members to have those frank, honest, and sometimes difficult conversations. And it's okay to have disagreement. I think it makes us better at our jobs at REBNY to hear from all sides of our membership. And I think it generally results in us taking smarter, better, more thoughtful positions. So, there's no magic bullet when that happens. But I will say we don't take a lot of votes. So we try to avoid as much conflict as we can. Jeff, you asked about sort of how do we do advocacy with the sort of the mountain of stuff coming at us. And I think a lot of that comes from both identifying issues with our members and staying in constant dialogue with them about the different things that are happening, but it also requires keeping our ear to the ground about what policymakers are trying to accomplish. So being in contact with state senators, state assembly members, the governor, the mayor, city council members. What are they trying to do? Where are their priorities? What are they hearing from their constituents? How can we help them solve those problems? What are the things they're prioritizing? How can we give them feedback early on? And so that's a big part of how we try to do it also.
Yeah, just to add to that, just from my experience, you guys also work with other organizations. The New York City Co-op and Condo Council, where their legislative director or their director is a member of one of your committees. I know my personal experience with the President's Co-op and Condo Council, and we partnered on many issues, that we agree on, which has made everybody more effective. Also, one thing we didn't mention, there's also a broker segment, or whatever the word you want to use, in a group as part of REBNY. And there were many issues, especially being a co-op attorney, that there was a balancing act that I thought was always carefully treaded, and everybody's point of view was always respected.
You're right. You're absolutely right. There is a very large segment of our membership. The most members are in REBNY are residential agents, professionals, brokers, who are very active in the New York City real estate ecosystem, and we're proud to represent them. You're right that sometimes there are things that are on their minds that are not necessarily on the minds of developers, or there might be not on the minds of co-ops and condos, but to your point, I think a frank dialogue and open door and trying to find the right solution is often, what all of our members are looking for us to do.
Last legislative session, around June of last year, Zach and I were working on issues regarding the state level Corporate Transparency Act, and Zach was very helpful in guiding me on that, and we were able to amend the language of the statute so it would exempt co-op and condos. That very same day, a Real Deal article came out about ground leases, and Zach and I were on the exact polar opposite ends of the issue. So we still remain friends after that, but that's the nature of the beast.
I'm really glad you brought it up. One of the things that is really important for us is our ability to work with groups who we don't always agree with, and to build relationships with organizations across New York State, whether that's in the co-op condo space, whether that's in the development space, whether that's in the economic development space. And it's been a real part of our efforts over the last several years to try to work more broadly in coalitions. And I think that's been a very deliberate choice for us because, to your point, who the messenger is to any particular elected official is a really important thing. And so it's something we're conscious of, that there are some folks who REBNY can and should and does talk to, and is in some issues where we are the right people to be out in front and to be leading the conversation on things like how little housing we've been building, et cetera. But there are some issues where you might be better suited to have a conversation, even though we where we have alignment. And so I think it's been great to work with people like you and to try to expand those coalitions and to grow the number of people who legislators hear from. Because at the end of the day, government and particularly legislative bodies are, small c, conservative institutions. They respond to pressures that the public puts on them. And so when you can work across multiple organizations and amplify those views, it's always more effective.
And another issue that we worked on several years ago, and again, we're in a very pro-tenant environment at the New York City level and the New York State level, and the Tenant Protection Act passed New York State, and the good faith, good cause eviction bill passed. And of course, the co-op and condo community was, self-interest, wanted to just do a carve out, while I'm sure the property owners wanted to defeat the bill. And I will say, when the tea leaves were read and it seemed like the carve out was the best we can do, we always got great support from REBNY, and it was appreciated and noted in the co-op community.
No, I'm glad. Thanks for mentioning it. I think that's what you put your finger on a really important thing in sort of the advocacy space, right? Which is sort of like living in the world of the possible. And a lot of what we do is try to figure out, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve? What are the different ways we have to attack it? And then what are the politically viable solutions? And once you sort of identify what that is, being able to develop strategies around that is really important. So that's a great example where, we were able to work together and identify the right way to go about trying to address a very important piece of the policy puzzle for co-ops and condos. And that's extended. And you mentioned the LLC disclosure effort, where we worked closely together last year. Where the legislature, I don't think they ever intended to sweep in co-ops into it, but the way the language was written, it was arguable whether they had or not. And so we're able to go to them and clarify and make sure that co-ops weren't included was a really important thing. And so opportunities like that are a big part of what we try to make sure that we accomplish.
So there's the management arm, there's the brokers, there's property owners, developers, etc. Co-op and condos are not members or cannot be members per se of REBNY. Is that a correct statement?
It's not that they can't be members. I think there's, it's just one of these things where we're such a big organization that there's not really a great place to fit them in, the boards themselves. And there are a lot of other, I think, very good organizations who wake up every day thinking about representing co-op and condo boards, whether that's the President's Council, whether that's the Council of New York Cooperatives and Condominiums, or others, who are not necessarily members of REBNY, but I think of as peer organizations who we partner with on many things.
Yeah, and you have the Venn diagram, you have the overlap. What are some of the issues that REBNY's worked on that would affect the co-op and condo community?
Yeah, we've talked about a bunch of them already, but things that jump to my mind. I talked a little bit earlier about the co-op condo tax abatement, which is obviously a super important piece of policy for the community. And that's really been two things in the last several years. One is advocacy for the abatement program, which was designed to help equalize and rationalize the property tax treatment of co-ops and condos. It's not a given that things like that get extended year after year after year. There's been a pretty loud and aggressive policy push from some elected officials to end that abatement and redirect the money to some other purpose, is how they would argue it. And so we've been able to push back on that and make sure that the program gets extended to the point where we're able to get the first long-term extension several years ago, which we're going to have to do again in the coming years. And then it's about implementing, right? So now that the program's been established, how's it administered? How does it run? And I talked already a little bit about, the work we've done together around helping the Department of Finance make sure they have a system that could actually work so that, taxpayers can actually benefit from the program. On other things like local law compliance, I think we've spent a lot of time working with the co-op condo community. We haven't talked about it yet, but I know a big issue over the last several years has been compliance with Local Law 97, the city's building emissions and performance standard, which, from our perspective is a very well-intentioned but fundamentally flawed approach to accomplishing a goal I think all New Yorkers share. Because it asks co-ops and condos, many of them, to take very economically irrational actions. And on the flip side, the government has failed to deliver the support that those buildings need to get where they need to go, both by delivering a clean and reliable electric grid and providing support to help buildings overcome those economic barriers when they're already facing, big budgetary pressures from rising costs and additional local mandates. And so we've worked very hard with the community to try to make sure that there's some rational compliance standards in this first several years. And, I think we've made some progress and we probably have a lot longer to go. Other things like that jump to mind: the facade inspection program. The Department of Buildings and the City Council for many years now have been very eager to reform that system. From their perspective, too many sheds, too long, all of that. And, we've been able to, I think, work really well across the entire real estate sector, including with the co-op condo community, even as that conversation about, hey, the work needs to happen faster, we need to get sheds down, to help also rationalize the system so that hopefully, over time now the Department of Buildings could extend out the life cycle of the facade inspection program. So it's not every 5 years, maybe it's a slightly longer time for many buildings. Maybe there's a bit better way to give people more time to comply because, you need to get terracotta and it takes a year to get it and all that sort of stuff, which we know many of the co-op condo buildings across the city are facing. And then I just think about other things in the coming years that we're going to have to be dealing with. And, things that jump to my mind, the J51 program, which, for example, is something that's very important, I think, to many of the co-ops and condos in the boroughs, particularly, in addition to a whole bunch of rent stabilized buildings all over the city. That program is up for renewal again in Albany this year. And, we're going to have to work really hard to make sure that program can be turned into a more viable tool to help building owners meet their needs. So a whole range of things we work on. And I think it touches almost all aspects of administering a cooperative condominium.
Great stuff. And thank you for your hard work on these issues. Richard, time to shine, brother.
All right. So let's talk about the Iowa State Fair. Did you ever go?
I have been.
What is it like? It sounds very legendary. And what is it like for someone who's never been there?
It's like heaven. No, it's not quite the Field of Dreams, but it's an incredible opportunity for people to see what happens throughout the state, whether it's, I think things like the butter cow are always super famous and the gigantic turkey legs you can eat, but it's a good opportunity for different kinds of folks from across the state to show what they do, particularly, the ag sector and the ag community, which is a huge part of what happens there. And so it's a great place to sort of see a slice of life.
Okay, so Nashville has the hot chicken, New York has pizza. What's the Iowa dish?
Maybe made rights. So sort
What's
of
that?
It's kind of like a sloppy Joe.
You're getting me hungry.
My other favorite thing about Iowa is you go and you order a salad and it's a little bit of iceberg lettuce and mostly cheese, egg, and bacon. But that's okay.
Did New York emulate the Iowa caucuses in any way? Would we benefit from something like that?
I think New York would benefit from greater voter participation. One of the challenges I think locally is just, relatively low turnout, particularly in local elections. But even, the primary we just had, I think the highest turnout in a mayoral primary, and it was not close to half the electorate participating. Does the Iowa caucus encourage turnout? I think you could argue it both ways, but I do think the amount of engagement was often very high, and I think New York would benefit from more civic engagement and participation. Maybe not exactly in the same way, but in that ethos.
And finally, you lived in Iowa and DC. Did they have any co-ops in those states or regions, or was it more of a New York Northeast kind of thing?
I think Jeff might know better than me. I think it's more of a New York kind of thing. I think there's more akin to homeowners associations, a little bit more prevalent, particularly in Iowa.
I can't speak to Iowa. I've never been, but in DC, I know there's in the southeast quadrant on the river I think it's called Harbor Square. It's a huge development, and they're co-ops. And I know that because my father-in-law used to live there, and I was fascinated because I always assumed they were condos, and then they called it a board of directors, not a board of managers, and they were co-ops. So there are some co-ops in DC, but it's nothing's like New York. It's a very unique form of shared housing that is predominantly a New York thing. Zach, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us. And by the way, congratulations, you are now officially a Co-op and Condo Insider. And there's only 11 in the world, so you're one of 11. It is a growing club. And we thank you for your time and for your insights.
Well, thank you for having me, and I look forward to the ranks growing.
Okay. All right, so everybody, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Co-op and Condo Insider. We hope you found today's conversation informative and insightful. Don't forget to subscribe. We're available on all major podcast platforms. Until next time, stay informed.